you're a man listening to this right now, I
Yep.
want you to just pause for a second.
Yeah, just completely stop whatever you're thinking about and look around.
Exactly. Consider the physical space you're in at this exact moment. Maybe you're sitting in some climate-controlled office,
Or maybe you're stuck in traffic in the sealed metal box.
right? Or just walking down a perfectly paved, totally sanitized sidewalk. And I want you to ask yourself a genuinely uncomfortable question.
Do you feel stifled?
Yeah. Do you feel like on a near constant basis trapped by the contradictory demands of modern society?
Like you're operating under this bizarre rule book where you're demanded to be one thing, but then ruthlessly penalized for it right after.
Exactly. And if you have this lingering, gnawing hunger to break out of that paralyzing loop, to reclaim this primal biological drive to explore and conquer and actually understand the physical machinery of the world, then you are exactly who we're speaking to today. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's an incredibly profound and honestly vital question to start with, because that gnawing sensation you just described, it isn't just an individual failing,
No, not at all.
it's a systemic symptom. And it's the exact phenomenon at the heart of the material we're unpacking today.
And before we get totally lost in the weeds here, or I guess in the water, do us a quick favor. Hit the like and subscribe buttons right now.
Yeah, please do. It's really the only way we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
Right, these exhaustive explorations into the text that are actively rewiring how we understand our culture. So, let's unpack this. Our mission today is a comprehensive review of a genuinely groundbreaking 2025 ebook.
It's called Puddle Pursuit: Masculine Exploration and the Hidden Life of Urban Waters by Conrad Reicher.
And I'll say right up front, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and secure a copy of this immediately.
Definitely. And follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, on Substack.
Yeah, because what we're about to discuss is going to fundamentally alter the way you look at the literal concrete beneath your feet. This is specifically for all the men out there, especially those in the manosphere or men's rights spaces, who feel like society has just cornered them.
Reicher is presenting a premise that sounds, on its surface, almost absurdly counterintuitive.
Right.
He argues that the key to breaking out of what he calls the modern risk-averse matrix doesn't require a flight to the Himalayas.
Or, buying $50,000 worth of off-grid survival gear.
Exactly. He argues the escape hatch is literally in the gutters, the drainage ditches, and the overlooked puddles of the urban environment.
I mean, he's essentially saying the frontier didn't disappear, we just paved over it. And now we're conditioned to step right over the cracks where it leaks through.
Which brings us to how he opens the book.
Yeah.
He establishes this psychological landscape that makes this exploration so necessary.
Yeah, he calls it the matrix of modern masculinity.
Yeah.
And he leans heavily into this psychological concept of the double bind.
The double bind is such a brilliant framework for this.
It really is. Reading this section felt less like sociology and more like he had tapped my phone and just listened to the anxieties of every guy I know.
Well, in psychological terms, a double bind is this communicative dilemma where you receive two conflicting messages.
And one message totally negates the other.
Exactly. So a successful response to one means you fail the other, and Reicher maps this perfectly onto the modern male experience.
Break that down a bit. How does society actually do this to men?
On a macro level, society still implicitly demands that men act as stoic pillars. We're expected to be the infrastructure maintainers, the protectors, the providers who absorb shock.
Right, keep the machinery running without complaining.
But the explicit cultural messaging you see everywhere is the exact opposite.
Oh, absolutely. The dominant narrative actively shames that traditional stoicism.
Men are constantly bombarded with this directive to open up, shed those protective layers, be relentlessly vulnerable, and dismantle their stoicism.
Because it's framed as inherently toxic. But here's the teeth of the trap, the reason it's a true double bind.
Yeah, the punishment phase.
Right. Reicher points out, and there's a mountain of sociological data in the book to back this up, that the moment a man actually complies, the moment he drops the facade and shows unfiltered fear during a crisis, the ground just drops out from under him.
He is quietly penalized. The people relying on him lose confidence.
He loses respect at work. His perceived utility plummets. So he's punished if he stays stoic and punished if he opens up.
Which generates this profound cognitive dissonance. When every action yields a penalty, your biological response is to just freeze, stop acting entirely.
And Riker describes modern culture as this hyper-sanitized, risk-averse terrarium,
It's designed to eliminate all physical friction and danger.
which inadvertently eliminates all the physical avenues where the masculine spirit of adventure and conquest historically found expression.
Right. It makes me think of an analogy that kept popping into my head while reading his breakdown.
Oh, the zoo analogy.
Yeah, exactly. You look at modern men, and it's exactly how zookeepers treat an apex predator born in captivity.
In this sterile concrete enclosure.
Right. The zookeepers mean well. They remove the diseases, they drop pre-butchered meat right in front of the animal so it never has to hunt.
It's perfectly safe. But the animal starts pacing the cage.
It starts pulling its own fur out because society is basically handing us a spreadsheet, a smartphone, and a climate-controlled pod.
And they expect us to just casually forget millions of years of evolutionary biology that built us to trek across glaciers and conquer the frontier.
That is the exact physiological reality Riker points to. That pacing predator is the human doom-scrolling on a smartphone at 2 in the morning.
When you deny an organism its evolutionary function, that pent-up energy turns inward and gets neurotic.
We traded the raw elements of the physical world for endless digital feeds. But the brain doesn't know what to do with a digital feed.
No tactile feedback, no actual risk, no genuine reward. It's just empty calories.
And Riker paints this vivid visual contrast to drive this home. He juxtaposes the modern adult male walking down a city block, eyes glued to a screen, with the instinct of a 7-year-old boy.
Think about a boy right after a heavy rainstorm. His absolute first instinct, before society conditions it out of him, is to crouch down in the mud.
He wants to physically plunge his hands into the raw elements.
He observes a water strider, grabs a stick to measure the puddle's depth, or digs a mini canal to change the flow.
And we look at that through this lens of modern sanitation and think, oh, he's just being a nuisance, getting dirty.
But Riker correctly identifies that this is a highly complex biological imperative.
That boy is engaging in tactile mastery of his environment. He's conducting literal physics experiments.
Learning fluid dynamics, cause and effect. It's not a childish phase to be disciplined out. It's the foundational training ground for scientific inquiry.
But the Matrix demands we put those childish things away. Stay clean, get on the sidewalk, focus on the sterile, fragile path of corporate adulthood.
So if this modern society is a trap of rigid expectations and enforced permanence, Riker argues the escape hatch requires a radical philosophical shift.
And this is where the book takes a turn that is just brilliant.
He doesn't point to Mount Everest. He points to the gutter. He introduces what he calls stoicism in the gutter.
Using the urban puddle as the ultimate philosophical teacher, it's a masterful recontextualization of ancient philosophy.
Chapter 2 is entirely dedicated to mapping the life cycle of a temporary body of water onto the human experience, right?
Yeah, he uses the puddle as a tangible manifestation of impermanence, which is a core tenet of Stoicism.
Let's actually break down the physics and biology of that life cycle, because the way he describes it is wild.
You have a heavy rainstorm hitting the asphalt, the water pools in a depression, maybe a pothole in a Wendy's parking lot.
And the moment the water settles, it's not just water anymore. It becomes an intensely active hub of life.
Even in a polluted city, it immediately teems with microorganisms, windblown seeds, algae.
It has a high-functioning purpose for that specific micro-ecosystem. But then the weather shifts. The sun comes out.
And within hours, or maybe a couple of days, evaporation accelerates and it vanishes entirely.
It just ceases to exist. It's the ultimate ephemeral structure.
Now, Riker contrasts that violently productive, brief lifespan with the modern man's paralyzing obsession with permanence.
We're conditioned by the Matrix to believe success equals permanence.
Chasing a career that will last 40 years, accumulating permanent wealth, clinging to social status.
Operating under this delusion that if we build something rigid enough, we'll be safe from the chaos of the universe.
But the physics of the universe dictate that nothing is permanent. Institutions shift. Industries are wiped out by tech overnight.
Rules of society are continually rewritten. So when a man anchors his masculine worth to something he thinks is permanent, he's building a house on a fault line.
Exactly. And when that fault line shifts, when he loses the job or the status, he doesn't just lose an asset, he loses his structural integrity.
This is where Riker points back to the puddle. The puddle doesn't experience existential dread over its evaporation.
It doesn't waste its existence lamenting that the sun will eventually boil it away.
It just seizes the immediate opportunity to exist. It adapts to the depression in the concrete, supports life, fulfills its function, and gracefully returns to the atmosphere.
He illustrates this with this narrative in the book about a guy named Greg.
Oh man, Greg the accountant. That story was so relatable.
He's the quintessential corporate guy, played entirely by the rules of the modern matrix.
Sacrificed his health, his exploratory drive, his sense of adventure, all for this permanent position at a major firm.
And then, during a corporate restructuring, he's laid off. Suddenly, the permanence is gone. His identity is totally shattered.
Riker describes Greg sitting on a park bench near Catatonic, and his eyes lock onto a puddle forming in the parking lot during a drizzle.
And it triggers this profound cognitive reframing. He sits there for hours, watches it form, watches light reflect off it, sees a bird bathe in it.
And as the afternoon sun peaks, he watches the edges recede until it's just a faint, damp outline.
The cognitive shift Greg experiences is incredible. Watching evaporation taught him what decades of corporate grinding couldn't.
He realized his career wasn't the concrete, it was the puddle.
It was a temporary convergence of circumstances. It served a vital purpose for a season, and then environmental conditions changed and it evaporated.
And crucially, he realized evaporation wasn't a permanent flaw in his character. He was just a natural phase of a dynamic universe.
Riker uses this to pivot into a broader societal critique, because entire societies panic in the face of impermanence, too.
Yeah, he brings up the green slime in New York City during the 1970s.
Such a crazy historical phenomenon.
I consider myself a history buff,
Yeah.
and I had never heard of this specific panic. The media reaction was hysterical, but deeply telling.
It perfectly encapsulates our detachment from nature. In the mid-70s, citizens noticed urban puddles manifesting this bright neon green slime.
And you have to remember the context of the 70s. Cold War paranoia, industrial pollution awareness, urban decay.
The public reaction was widespread hysteria. Local news ran sensationalized segments, rumors of mutated aliens, Soviet chemical weapons, radioactive sludge.
And what was the actual boring biological reality?
It was incredibly mundane, just a temporary localized bloom of a specific algae reacting with trace amounts of copper runoff.
A completely natural biological reaction. But Riker's point is that when a sanitized society is confronted with raw, spontaneous biology outside their controlled matrix, they project their deepest fears onto it.
We're terrified of the unknown and dynamic systems we can't control.
Now, I want to step in here and offer some pushback, because I can hear a cynical listener raising an eyebrow.
Sure.
The puddle is a brilliant metaphor. It's nature's ultimate memento mori. But practically speaking, how does a man integrate this without descending into nihilism?
It's a fair question.
If we accept that our careers and strength will just evaporate, doesn't that invite apathy? Why bother building anything?
That's the most common pitfall when interpreting Stoicism. But Riker argues that accepting impermanence is the absolute antithesis of apathy.
Okay, explain the mechanics of that.
It's the only legitimate foundation for true masculine resilience. You have to analyze where the fear of failure originates.
Right.
The paralyzing fear that prevents men from taking risks or speaking their minds is entirely rooted in the illusion of permanence.
We freeze because we think failure is etched in stone.
Exactly. We give failure an eternal weight it doesn't possess. When a man internalizes the lesson of the puddle, the fear drops away.
He's emancipated.
He knows permanence is a myth, so he's free to act boldly. The meaning is generated in the present moment of struggle and creation, not in eternal preservation.
That's a massive paradigm shift. It takes the weight off his shoulders so he can finally stand up and move.
And Riker argues that the second a man accepts this, his biological imperative to explore violently reawakens.
He stops hiding in the zoo enclosure, which transitions us perfectly into the hard science of the book.
Yeah, he grounds this entirely in neurobiology, the biology of curiosity.
He links the masculine drive for exploration to the brain's neurochemical reward systems, specifically dopamine.
And in popular culture, dopamine is mischaracterized as just the feel-good chemical.
Like a hit of pleasure.
Right, but neurobiologically, it's the motivation molecule. It's the reward mechanism for seeking, foraging, and discovering.
It's the chemical of anticipation and pursuit. What makes you want to see what's over the next hill?
In evolutionary terms, it was a survival imperative. Curiosity driven by dopamine pushed early man to leave the cave, track migrations, cross oceans.
The brain literally rewards us for engaging with the unknown. But then Riker applies this to modern institutions, specifically the education system.
And it's a brutal, necessary critique.
He argues our educational infrastructure is actively hostile to the biological imperatives of young boys.
The friction is undeniable. You have a young boy whose brain is screaming for tactile exploration and kinetic risk-taking.
To develop those dopaminergic pathways.
And we place him in an environment demanding absolute physical stillness and rote memorization of abstract concepts.
Stripped of any physical context. Riker argues this hyper-focus on standardized testing doesn't just make school boring. It suppresses neurological development.
It pathologizes their biology. If a boy wants to dig in the dirt or pull things apart to see how they work, he's labeled as having a behavioral disorder.
He's told he lacks focus. We take the exact behaviors that historically created the greatest engineers and scientists, and we treat them as diseases.
We literally medicate them into submission, and the long-term consequences are devastating.
You eventually extinguish that drive. The sense of wonder is killed.
We're looking at a generation of disconnected men whose dopamine systems are hijacked by digital algorithms.
Because the physical world was walled off with do not touch signs. But the book provides incredible examples of what happens when a man protects that curiosity.
The story of Dr. James Carter is the absolute pinnacle of this.
I was totally gripped by this section. Give the listener the background on Carter.
He's a highly respected microbiologist who explicitly refused to confine his curiosity to a sterile university lab.
He retained that boyhood obsession with the mud.
He would walk the streets of New York City after rainstorms, specifically seeking out the most polluted, oil-slick puddles to take samples.
Looking at the exact things society tells us to wash off our shoes. And what did he find in that toxic sludge?
In one of these heavily polluted depressions, he discovered an entirely new, undocumented strain of microorganism.
A new species of tardigrade.
Yes, which he named Aqua urbanensis.
Now, for those who don't read biology journals, tardigrades are water bearers. Microscopic, eight-legged animals that look like sci-fi creatures.
And they're extremely resilient. They possess a mechanism called cryptobiosis.
Where they can essentially pause their metabolic processes when things get hostile, right?
Exactly. Extreme heat, radiation, vacuum of space. They curl into a dehydrated state and replace their cell water with sugar to prevent tearing.
But the wild part isn't just finding a tardigrade. It's where he found it.
Not in an Arctic glacier. In a toxic soup of heavy metals and urban microplastics.
And Riker notes that understanding how this strain adapted has multi-billion-dollar implications for biotechnology.
But the philosophical takeaway is that this world-altering discovery wasn't made by someone staring at a screen.
He was a man who went into the dirt. And it isn't just PhDs. Riker points to the democratization of this mindset with the YouTube channel Puddle Pursuit.
A father and his young son. Their entire premise is finding interesting puddles, taking samples, looking under a cheap microscope, and talking through the scientific method.
They identify rotifers and algae blooms, and they have over 200,000 subscribers.
It proves there's a massive latent hunger among men and boys to reconnect with raw, tactile exploration.
The masculine drive for citizen science. So this biological need to conquer scales up. For grown men, it doesn't stop at a microscope.
It scales to the macro level of the city itself, which plunges the book into urbex.
Urban exploration. This is where the thesis gets intensely physical.
Urbex is a global underground subculture revolving around infiltrating and exploring abandoned ruins and hidden infrastructure beneath modern cities.
Guys mapping abandoned subway tunnels, navigating century-old sewer systems.
Riker frames this as a literal physical rebellion against the risk-averse culture.
And the demands are immense. Descending into a forgotten Victorian sewer system involves sensory deprivation, threat of collapse, toxic gases.
A single misstep can be fatal. No cell service. It demands extreme teamwork.
Which triggers oxytocin and bonds them in ways corporate team building can't replicate.
Over 80% of men involved in urbex report a profound sense of existential fulfillment. They're satiating a primal drive.
The case studies read like a dystopian novel. The lost rivers of London, like the Fleet and the Tyburn.
Massive waterways that were bricked over and buried during the Victorian era, but they still flow beneath the streets.
He notes some still flood basements, requiring massive pumps. He also highlights an urbex crew in Tokyo mapping the buried Kanda River.
And crews in New York City descending into abandoned subway tunnels, discovering self-sustaining ecosystems.
Albino insects, unique fungal networks in absolute dark. But I want to play devil's advocate here.
Go ahead.
Urbex involves criminal trespassing. Critics call it reckless vandalism that drains emergency resources. How does Riker differentiate this from adrenaline junkies?
He's meticulous about this. He doesn't romanticize thrill-seeking True urbex is governed by a rigid ethos.
Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints.
They don't break locks. They view themselves as rogue archaeologists, citizen scientists.
They study municipal blueprints for months.
And tying back to the theme, they use subterranean puddles as navigational markers. In pitch-black labyrinths, they observe microcurrents to map the hydrology.
Reading the water like a frontiersman reads moss on a tree.
They're actively reclaiming hidden history. And exploring these ruins brings them face-to-face with the monumental engineering of the men who built them.
Which shifts the focus. You realize a brick-lined sewer from 1860 is still holding up skyscrapers, and it forces you to ask, what happened to men who built things to last?
This brings us to the legacy of builders, protectors, and the duty of iron and stone.
Riker analyzes urban water systems as a manifestation of masculine ambition. Men envisioned them, died building them, and must maintain them.
He draws a stark contrast between ancient engineering and modern decay. The Aqua Claudia in Rome, completed in 52 AD.
Built with volcanic ash concrete stretching 40 miles, they built it to stand for eternity.
And they had a highly respected office dedicated solely to its demanding physical upkeep.
Riker juxtaposes that with our current reality. The lead pipe crisis in Flint, the Katrina levees, bursting water mains.
He's diagnosing a psychological collapse. We've lost the rigorous discipline of the men who lay the foundations.
And Riker gets into some heavily debated territory here, specifically looking at the history of our institutions.
Yeah, he essentially makes the argument that modern infrastructure has decayed because these institutions were, in his words, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right, and to be clear to you listening, we aren't taking a side on that political framing here. We're just impartially reporting Riker's premise.
Exactly. He claims that this ideological shift resulted in a total loss of traditional, rigorous masculine maintenance.
The focus moved away from the hard duty of structural upkeep to what he sees as softer priorities, which leads to how he reframes environmentalism.
Right. Mainstream culture frames it as a soft, passive issue, reducing your carbon footprint with a paper straw.
Riker says true conservation is a brutally hard, explicitly masculine duty of stewardship.
Protecting a watershed requires heavy machinery, physical labor, confronting toxic hazards, and aggressive leadership.
He highlights John, a Chicago plumber. John noticed lead service lines degrading, gathered empirical data, mobilized his union, and fought the city bureaucracy for funding.
He acted as the protector. Riker also mentions off-duty construction workers in Detroit.
Who cleaned up a toxic urban pond on their own dime with their own excavators.
And the massive effort to transform NYC's abandoned railways into the High Line. These are acts of building and protecting.
So, addressing the toxic masculinity conversation, society blames traditional masculinity for destroying the planet.
But Riker flips the script. He argues it's the absence of strong traditional masculine leadership that lets our cities rot.
When culture demonizes the builder instinct, men check out and retreat to the digital terrarium.
And when men check out, the infrastructure crumbles. The solution is a massive revival of masculine stewardship.
And by doing this, men experience a spiritual awakening, leading to the final concept, scientific spirituality and the cosmos in a puddle.
He introduces this to heal a fracture in the male psyche, the false dichotomy between being a hyper-rational atheist or an overly emotional mystic.
Riker rejects both. Reason and reverence are two sides of the same coin.
A man can be grounded in physics and still experience profound awe.
He brings it back to the puddle. The hydrogen atoms in that dirty water were forged in ancient stars.
And the water likely arrived via icy comets during the early solar system.
So you're looking at extraterrestrial material pooling outside a grocery store. Comprehending that evokes active awe grounded in empirical reality.
And that scientifically literate awe is the ultimate fuel for resilience. It fuels the desire to protect the world.
He discusses how these urban puddles act as biological stepping stones for species migration across fragmented concrete.
They provide temporary hydration stations, allowing insects and birds to cross the urban desert.
He also mentions an ecologist who spent 10 years studying a single drainage ditch.
10 years observing one ditch, documenting over 200 distinct species.
A thriving universe hiding in plain sight. It's like aiming the Hubble telescope into the gutter.
But the ultimate question is, does realizing you're a tiny speck make you feel small?
Right. Does it crush your ambition?
Riker says it makes a man feel aggressively alive. It strips away manufactured modern anxieties.
Grounding him in reality. He's an active participant in an ancient lineage of builders. It's viscerally empowering.
It's a comprehensive, necessary worldview for the modern era.
Let's pull this all together. We unpack the psychological matrix, The double bind that stifles men.
We explored stoicism in the gutter, embracing impermanence.
The neurobiology of curiosity, dopamine, and how schools suppress young boys.
Urbex as a physical rebellion and citizen science.
Reclaiming the legacy of rigorous builders and stewards, fusing hard science with cosmic awe.
To truly master these concepts, you must read the full text.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Puddle Pursuit. Masculine Exploration and the Hidden Life of Urban Waters by Conrad Riker.
And follow at Conrad Riker on Substack.
While you're at it, please like and subscribe to our channel to help us keep producing these deep dives.
We deeply appreciate your time.
I want to leave you on the final thought built from today's text. Riker detailed how ephemeral puddles act as stepping stones for vulnerable species. I want you to evaluate your own life in those exact terms. Are you exhausting all your energy trying to build a rigid, permanent monument to your ego that the universe will inevitably wash away? Or are you striving to be a vital, life-giving stepping stone, providing the strength and resilience that allows the next generation of men to cross the wasteland and survive? Keep exploring.